and exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. Her skirt rode up during the meeting and revealed a secret no one could have imagined. The millionaire, accustomed to controlling everything, was hypnotized, as if he had rediscovered a past he tried to bury. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you like love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. She entered the room like someone carrying too many secrets in her body and too much silence in her soul. She wore a cheap grey blazer and a skirt that seemed to have belonged to another woman from another life. Her hair, meticulously tied back, hid the neck where there should have been a necklace, a gesture of vanity. But Emily Wilson wasn't vain. She was a well-trained ghost, infiltrated into the heart of an empire. The meeting was about high risk acquisitions in the energy sector in the Pacific Northwest. In that glass-walled room of power on the 40th floor of Fifth Avenue, there were only men and her, the recently transferred intern from the legal department, invisible in the hierarchy, made even more forgettable by the way she avoided eye contact, by how she never smiled. But upon sitting down, an involuntary movement caused her skirt to rise slightly, revealing part of her left thigh. It was just a moment. Enough for Michael Reynolds, president of Reynolds Group, and a man whose reputation was built on absolute control, to stop speaking, because what he saw there wasn't just skin, it was a symbol, a slightly faded old ink mark, a snake intertwined with a petalous rose. He knew that design. It had been etched in his mind since the night that changed his life. The fire in Portland 12 years ago, when a brothel on the city outskirts was consumed by flames. Michael had been rescued that night by a young woman covered in soot, who dragged him through burning corridors until she threw him into the torrential rain of the Pacific Northwest dawn. She disappeared before he could even thank her. Since then he had dreamed of eyes he could never fully see, only feel. The tattoo was the same, and the intern was somehow inexplicably connected to everything Michael had tried to forget, but never could. The report being presented by the financial director became background noise. Michael fixed his gaze on her, trying to decipher something familiar in the shape of her face, the curve of her shoulders, the way she held her pen. Emily kept her eyes lowered, but he could feel that she knew she was being watched. There was an almost electric tension in the air, as if the two were connected by an invisible thread that no one else in the room could perceive. When the meeting ended, Michael remained seated while the other executives left, discussing projections for the next quarter. Emily rose slowly, organized her papers with precise movements, and walked toward the door. As she passed by him, she paused for a fraction of a second and murmured, without looking at him, "You forgot to sign the contract. On page 15. Her voice was deep, husky, as if it had been forged in smoke. Michael looked at the document and realized he had indeed forgotten to sign. When he looked up, she had already left the room. That night, in his apartment on the Upper East Side, Michael couldn't sleep. He paced around his office, poured himself a whiskey, and stood looking out the window at the lights of New York City. The city was bustling below, but all he could think about was that tattoo. Those eyes he had never seen clearly, but carried in his memory like an obsession. 12 years ago, Michael was a young businessman on the rise, doing dubious business in the Pacific Northwest. He had been called to a meeting in Portland, supposedly about energy contracts, but which in reality involved money laundering schemes. The meeting was to take place in a brothel that served as a front for illegal operations. Michael was beginning to suspect that he had gotten involved in something much bigger and more dangerous than he had imagined. The fire started during the early morning hours. He woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of screams. The corridors were engulfed in flames, and Michael, disoriented, was trying to find an exit when someone grabbed him by the arm. It was a young woman, probably 15 or 16, thin, with long hair and enormous eyes. She didn't say a word, just guided him through the burning corridors with a determination that contrasted with her apparent fragility. They ran downstairs, jumped through windows, crawled under the smoke. The girl knew every corner of that place as if it were her own home, which Michael would later discover was exactly what it was. When they finally made it outside, the rain was falling hard, and Michael collapsed on the ground, coughing and breathless. When he turned to thank her, the girl had disappeared. He tried looking for her among the others who had managed to escape, but no one knew her. No one had seen her. The fire was investigated by the police. 17 people died, including several young women who worked at the location. Michael later discovered that many were minors, some brought from rural areas, others from neighboring states. The brothel was just the tip of an iceberg that involved human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and a network of corruption that extended all the way to Washington, D.C. Michael managed to leave the country before the investigations reached him. He moved to New York, rebuilt his life, created an empire. But he never forgot that night, and he never forgot the girl who saved him. Now, looking at the city lights, he wondered if it was possible that Emily was her. The age more or less matched. But how could she have gotten here? How could she have forged an identity, studied, infiltrated his company? The next morning, Michael arrived at the office earlier than usual. He asked the Human Resources Director to bring him Emily Wilson's file. The information was basic: 28 years old, law degree from New York University, specialization in corporate law, no family listed as emergency contacts. The address was a small apartment in Brooklyn. Michael asked his head of security to conduct a discreet investigation. What he discovered a few days later only increased his obsession. Emily Wilson practically didn't exist before 4 years ago. The documents were all in order, but there was something artificial about them, as if her identity had been carefully constructed. There were no photos of her on social media, no traces of her previous life, no friends, boyfriends, or college, classmates who clearly remembered her. Driven by impulses he could no longer control, Michael promoted her to his office. When he called Emily to his office to inform her of the promotion, she nodded as if she had been expecting it. "You don't seem surprised," said Michael, watching her carefully. "I always expect the unexpected, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, showing no emotion. "Why?" Emily looked at him directly for the first time since she had entered the company. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and there was something in them that Michael recognized immediately, a profound sadness, as if she had seen too much for her age, because life has taught me that things can change in an instant, and when they do, it's better to be prepared. From that day on, they shared the same environment every day. Michael's office was spacious, with a huge mahogany desk and a privileged view of Fifth Avenue. Emily worked at a smaller desk near the window, and each of her movements was observed by him. She always arrived at 7 in the morning, an hour before the workday started, and stayed late. She worked with intense concentration, as if each document were a matter of life and death. Gradually, Michael began to notice small details about her. Emily knew exactly how he liked his coffee, strong without sugar in the white porcelain cup that had belonged to his mother. She always left the most important contracts in order of priority on his desk, and never made a mistake about what was urgent and what could wait. When he became nervous, she placed a glass of cold water next to the documents he was reading. It was as if she knew him deeply. "How do you know that I get thirsty when I'm nervous?" he asked one day. "I observe," she replied simply. "And what else do you observe?" Emily stopped typing and looked at him. "That you touch the edge of the glass when you think of your mother, that you look out the window always at 3 in the afternoon, the time she died, that you have nightmares and wake up tired every morning." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. "How do you know that?" "Because I have nightmares too," she said, returning to work. The tension between them was palpable. Each conversation was a careful dance. Each silence carried the weight of things unsaid. Michael found himself inventing excuses to stay late at the office, just to spend more time near her. Emily didn't seem to mind the extended hours. In fact, she seemed to prefer the empty office when it was just the two of them and the distant noise of traffic below. One night, while they were reviewing a complex contract, Michael noticed that Emily was wearing a different perfume. It was something subtle with notes of jasmine and wood. When she leaned over the table to point something out in the document, he felt the warmth of her body, and for a moment completely lost focus on the work. "Are you all right, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, noticing that he had stopped reading. "I am," he lied. "Just tired." Emily studied him for a moment, as if she could read his thoughts. "May I ask you a personal question?" Michael nodded, curious. "Why did you promote me? I know it wasn't for my merits. There were more qualified people." The Sioux question caught him off guard. Michael could have invented a professional excuse, but there was something in her eyes that prevented him from lying. "Because you remind me of someone," he admitted. "Who?" "Someone who saved my life once." Emily didn't respond. Immediately, she lowered her eyes, and Michael had the impression that she was fighting against some emotion. "And if that person didn't want to be remembered?" she finally asked. "Why wouldn't they want to be?" "Because sometimes the past hurts too much to be revisited." They remained silent for a few minutes. The air in the office seemed to have become denser, charged with an electricity that neither of them knew how to discharge. "Emily," Michael said softly. "Yes?" "Have you ever been to Portland?" The question seemed to hit her like a punch. Emily went pale, and her hands trembled slightly. She stood up from her chair abruptly. "I need to go," she said, quickly gathering her papers. "Emily, wait. Good night, Mr. Reynolds." She left the office, leaving Michael alone with his suspicions and a growing certainty that Emily Wilson was much more than she appeared to be. He sat there, looking at the empty chair where she had been sitting, feeling as if he were on the verge of discovering something that would change his life forever. That night the nightmares returned with full force. Michael dreamed of fire, of screams, of corridors filled with smoke. But this time, when the girl guided him out of the fire, he could see her face. It was Emily. It was definitely Emily. He woke up sweating and with his heart racing. He looked at the clock, 4 in the morning. He got up, went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of cold water. His hands were still shaking when he opened the drawer where he kept some personal documents and took out a yellowed photograph. The photo had been taken by the police on the night of the fire. It showed the people who had managed to escape, gathered outside the burning building. Michael was there in the right corner, covered by a blanket someone had given him. And in the background, almost imperceptible in the darkness, was the silhouette of a thin young woman with long hair. Michael took a magnifying glass and examined the photo carefully. The quality wasn't good, but there was something in the shape of the girl's face, in the way she held her arms, that was unmistakably familiar. He spent the rest of the early morning hours awake, alternately looking at the photo and out the window, waiting for dawn to arrive so he could confront Emily. He needed to know the truth. He needed to understand why she had appeared in his life after all these years, and what she wanted from him. When Emily arrived at the office the next morning, promptly at 7 o'clock, Michael was already there waiting. She seemed surprised to see him, but didn't say anything. She simply put her bag on the desk and began organizing the day's documents. "We need to talk," Michael said. "About what?" "About Portland, about the fire, about who you really are." Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at him. There was something different in her eyes that morning, as if a mask had been removed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice didn't sound convincing. Michael took the photo from his pocket and placed it on the table. Emily looked at it, and he saw the exact moment when she recognized the image. Her shoulders dropped and she closed her eyes as if she were feeling pain. "You remember?" he said. It wasn't a question. Emily opened her eyes and stared at him. This time there was nothing submissive or invisible about her. There was a strength, a determination that Michael recognized immediately. "I remember everything," she said simply. And in that moment, Michael knew that his life would never be the same again. The silence that followed Emily's confession was as dense as the smoke from that night in Portland. Michael felt the world reorganizing itself around him, as if all the pieces of a puzzle he had been trying to put together for years had finally found their places. But the image that formed wasn't comforting. It was terrifying. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Emily moved away from the desk and walked to the window. Down below, New York was waking up with its usual noise of horns and engines, but up there on the 40th floor, the world seemed suspended in time. "Do you really want to know?" she said without turning around. "I need to know." Emily remained silent for a long moment, as if she were deciding how much of the truth she could reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that Michael had never noticed before. "I was 15 years old that night. I had been living in that place for 3 years since my mother died. She worked there too, but she was different from the other girls. She took care of me, protected me. When she died of an overdose, I had nowhere to go. The owner of the place, a man named Frank Miller, said I could stay, but I would have to work when I turned 16. Michael felt his stomach turn. Frank Miller. He remembered that name. He was one of the men Michael was supposed to meet that night, before the fire interrupted everything. "I knew that when I turned 16, my life would be over," Emily continued. "So I planned to run away. But before I could do that, the fire started, and you were there. Why did you save me? You didn't even know me." Emily turned to face him, and Michael saw tears in her eyes for the first time. "Because you were the only person in that place who didn't belong to that world. When I saw you in the hallway, desperate, lost, I thought, he can have a different life, he can get out of here and be something. And I wanted to be part of that, even if it was just for a few minutes." "And afterward? What happened to you?" "Afterward? I disappeared. I ran away during the confusion. I spent 2 years living on the streets of Portland, then managed to get to New York. A nun took me in, helped me study. I was a good student, always had been. I got a scholarship to college, graduated in law, and during all those years I followed you from a distance." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean, followed me?" "I read about you in the newspapers, about how you had built an empire, how you were respected in the business world. I was proud of having saved someone who became important, but I was also angry. Angry about what? About you moving on as if nothing had happened, as if those girls who died in the fire didn't matter, as if I didn't matter." Her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. Michael stood up from his chair and walked over to her. "You think I forgot? You think a single night has passed without me thinking about that? About you? Then why did you never do anything? Why did you never try to find out what happened to the families of the girls who died? Why did you build your fortune on top of silence?" The accusation was fair and hurt because of it. Michael knew he had made selfish choices after the fire. He had fled, reinvented himself, tried to forget, but forgetting Emily had been impossible. "I was young, I was afraid. When I returned to the US, I tried to find out what had happened, but the investigations were suppressed. The newspapers stopped talking about the case. It was as if nothing had happened." "But you could have insisted. You had money, contacts. You could have brought justice. And now, what do you want from me now?" Emily stared at him with an intensity that made him take a step back. "I want you to pay for what you did, and for what you didn't do." "How?" "I'm still deciding." Michael felt a mixture of fear and fascination. There was something dangerous about Emily, something he hadn't noticed before, or perhaps he had noticed and chosen to ignore it. "You infiltrated my company to get revenge. I infiltrated your company to understand who you've become, to decide if you deserved forgiveness or punishment." "And what was your conclusion?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She studied him carefully, as if she were analyzing every detail of his face. "You're more complex than I imagined," she admitted. "There's goodness in you, but also cowardice. There's remorse, but also convenience. You suffer, but not enough." "Enough for what?" "To compensate for the suffering that your omission caused." Michael felt anger growing inside him. "I was 22 years old, Emily. I was just a scared kid who almost died in that fire. It wasn't my responsibility to save everyone." "It wasn't your responsibility," she agreed, "but it could have been your choice." They stood staring at each other for a long moment, the tension between them almost palpable. Michael realized there were layers of emotion in her that he had not yet discovered. Anger, pain, desire for justice, but also something more. Something that seemed very much like longing. "Why did you agree to work here?" he asked. If you hate me so much, why did you stay? Because hate and fascination are sometimes the same thing, she replied, and Michael felt his heart accelerate. Emily. No, she interrupted him. Don't say my name like that. Like what? Like it means something to you. But it does. The confession escaped before he could contain himself. Emily looked at him in surprise, as if she hadn't expected this honesty. What does it mean? She asked, her voice softer. It means that you saved more than my life that night. You gave me a reason to live. All these years, when I wondered why, I had survived. The answer was always you. Emily closed her eyes as if his words caused physical pain. Don't do this, she whispered. Do what? Give me hope that you might be better than I thought. Michael approached her slowly, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. And if I can be, then I would have to forgive you, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. They were close now, close enough for Michael to feel the heat emanating from her body, close enough for him to see the small scars on her hands, marks of a difficult life that she had hidden under professional clothes and discreet makeup. Emily, he said again, and this time she didn't protest. What do you want from me, Michael? It was the first time she had said his name, and the sound coming from her lips made him tremble. I want a chance to do things right this time. And if it's too late, then at least I'll try. Emily looked into his eyes for a long moment, as if she was searching for lies or manipulation. Apparently she found none, because her expression softened slightly. There are things about me you don't know, she said. Things I did to survive. I'm not the innocent girl you saved 12 years ago. I'm not the same man you saved 12 years ago, he replied. We're strangers to each other. Then let's get to know each other again. Emily hesitated, and Michael saw the moment she made a decision. She extended her hand and lightly touched his face. Her fingers were cold, but the touch burned. If I say yes, she whispered, if I give this chance to both of us, do you promise never to lie to me again? I promise. And do you promise to help me bring justice for the girls who died that night? Michael felt the weight of the promise, but didn't hesitate. I promise. Emily nodded slowly, as if she was sealing a pact. Then let's try. The kiss that followed was inevitable. Gentle at first, almost hesitant, but it quickly intensified. There were years of longing in that kiss, years of dreams and nightmares, of guilt and desire. Michael pulled her against him and felt as if he were finally coming home. When they separated, they were both breathless. This is crazy, Emily murmured, against his lips. The best kind of crazy in my life, he replied. They were interrupted by Michael's secretary knocking on the door. Emily quickly moved away, smoothing her hair and clothes, transforming herself back into the discreet and professional assistant. Michael adjusted his tie and tried to regain his composure. Come in, he said, his voice still slightly hoarse. The secretary entered with a stack of documents and informed him about a meeting that had been scheduled for that afternoon. Michael nodded, trying to concentrate on the professional information, but all he could think about was the taste of Emily's lips. When they were alone again, the atmosphere had changed. There was a different tension now, more intimate, more dangerous. We need to talk about how we're going to proceed, Emily said, returning to her desk. In relation to what? The investigation. If we're going to bring justice, we need evidence. We need to discover who was really behind that fire and why they wanted to kill you. Michael hadn't thought about this. All these years, he had assumed the fire was an accident, a random tragedy. But Emily's words made sense. Why would he have been in that specific place on that specific night if it wasn't part of something bigger? You think it was deliberate? I know it was deliberate. I heard conversations that night before the fire started. Someone knew you would be there. Someone wanted to kill you and didn't care how many people would die in the process. Who? I don't know yet, but I'll find out. We'll find out. We'll find. Michael felt a shiver of fear and excitement. Emily had become his partner in more than one sense. How do we start? I've already started, she admitted. I've been investigating for months. I have contacts, people who were there that night, and survived. Most are afraid to talk, but some have told me things. What kind of things? Frank Miller wasn't the real owner of the brothel. He answered to someone in Washington, D.C., someone powerful, and you weren't the only target that night. There were other people who were supposed to be in the building when it caught fire. Michael sat heavily in his chair. So it really was a mass murder. It was, and whoever ordered it is still alive, still out there, probably thinking they got away with it. But they didn't. No, Emily agreed, and there was something fierce in her voice. Because I survived, and now you know the truth. Michael looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Emily was stronger and more determined than he had imagined, but she was also more dangerous, and now somehow he had become part of her mission of vengeance. Emily, he said carefully, what exactly do you plan to do when you find out who it was? She looked him in the eyes, and Michael saw something in them that made him swallow hard. Justice, she said simply, whatever way is necessary. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. Michael tried to concentrate on meetings and contracts, but his mind was constantly returning to Emily and the revelations of the morning. She worked with her usual efficiency, but now he noticed things he had missed before. The way she analyzed everyone who entered the office, how her eyes moved constantly, always alert, always evaluating threats. Around 6 in the evening, when the office began to empty, Michael approached her desk. "Let's have dinner," he said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement. Emily hesitated. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because people will talk, and because I don't want you to think that this," she gestured between the two of them, "is going to make me change my mind about what needs to be done." "Understood. But I still want to have dinner with you." Emily studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but not in a public place and not at your apartment." "Where then?" "At my apartment. If you want to know who I really am, you need to see where I live." Michael agreed, curious about this new facet of Emily that was being revealed. Her apartment was in an old building in Brooklyn, very different from the luxury Michael was accustomed to. It was small but clean and organized. The walls were decorated with black and white photos of places Michael didn't recognize, and there were books scattered everywhere, not just law books, but literature, philosophy, history. "You cook?" he asked, noticing the aromas coming from the kitchen. "I learned out of necessity," she replied, taking off her blazer and wearing only a simple blouse. When you don't have money to eat out, you either learn to cook or you go hungry. Michael felt uncomfortable with her casual reminder about financial difficulties. His own life had been very different after leaving Portland. "Can I help?" Emily smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed her face. "Do you know how to cook?" "I know how to make scrambled eggs and instant noodles." "Then you can set the table." They worked in comfortable silence, and Michael was surprised by the naturalness of the situation. It was as if they had done this hundreds of times before. During dinner, a simple but delicious dish of risotto with shrimp, they talked about trivial things, books, movies, places they would like to visit. It was strange to discover that they had similar tastes, that they laughed at the same things. "You're different here," Michael observed. "How so?" "More relaxed, more to yourself." Emily took a sip of wine before answering. "At the office I wear a mask. Here, I can take it off." "Why do you need to wear a mask?" "Because if people knew who I really am, where I come from, they would treat me differently." "You would treat me differently." "That's not true." "No?" Emily got up and went to a dresser from which she took a folder. "Then tell me what you think of this." She placed the folder on the table and opened it. It was full of documents, photos, newspaper clippings, all related to the fire in Portland and its aftermath. Michael examined the papers with growing horror. There were photos of the victims, some very young. There were documents showing how the investigation was suppressed, how witnesses disappeared, how the press was silenced. "My God," he whispered. 17 girls died that night, Emily said, her voice firm but laden with emotion. The youngest was 13 years old. Her name was Maya, and she had arrived from Boise 3 weeks before. They promised her a job as a housemaid in Portland. Michael looked at the photo of a girl who didn't appear to be more than 12 years old and felt nauseated. "And this is Rebecca," Emily continued, pointing to another photo. 16 years old, from Seattle. She was running away from an abusive stepfather. And this is Carmen, from Salt Lake City, 15 years old. She was 3 months pregnant when she died. "Emily, please." "No," she interrupted him. "You need to see. You need to know their names, their faces, because they aren't just statistics. They were real people with dreams, with families who still cry for them." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the guilt he had tried to suppress for years. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know you didn't know, but now you do. The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" Michael opened his eyes and met hers. There was challenge there, but also hope. "I'll help you," he said. "I'll help you discover the truth and bring justice. Even if it destroys your reputation, even if it ends your business." Even then, Emily observed him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then tomorrow we begin for real." They spent the rest of the night planning. Emily showed Michael everything she had discovered. Names, dates, connections. It was a complex puzzle that involved politicians, businessmen, and criminals. And at the center of it all was someone who had ordered that massacre and managed to escape unpunished. When Michael finally prepared to leave, it was already past midnight. Emily accompanied him to the door. "Michael," she said when he was already in the hallway. "Yes?" "Thank you for agreeing to help, for not running away when you learned the truth. Thank you for not giving up on me." They looked at each other for a moment, and Michael wanted to kiss her again, but there was something in her posture that stopped him. Emily was still deciding if she could trust him completely. "Good night, Emily." "Good night." Michael went down the stairs with the feeling that his life had changed irrevocably. There was no going back. He had committed himself not only to Emily, but to the memory of those dead girls. And for the first time in 12 years, he felt he was finally doing the right thing. But he also knew that the path ahead would be dangerous. Whoever had orchestrated that massacre would not hesitate to kill again to protect their secrets. And now both he and Emily were in the crosshairs. As he drove back to his apartment, Michael couldn't get Emily's determined look out of his mind. She was stronger than he had imagined, braver, but she was also more vulnerable. And he was beginning to realize that he had fallen in love not only with the girl who had saved him, but with the woman she had become. The question was whether the two of them would survive long enough to discover where this passion could lead them. The first threat arrived 3 days later, slipped under Michael's office door during the early morning hours. A photo of him leaving Emily's building, with a simple message written in letters cut out of a magazine. Some secrets should remain buried. Michael found the envelope when he arrived at work the next morning. His hands trembled slightly as he held the photograph. Whoever had taken that photo knew exactly where he had been and with whom, and that meant they were being watched. Emily arrived promptly at 7, as always, but Michael noticed that she seemed tenser than usual. Her eyes moved constantly, analyzing every corner of the office, every person who passed by the hallway. "Did something happen?" he asked as soon as they were alone. Emily hesitated for a moment, then took an identical envelope from her bag. "I received this under my door this morning." Michael opened the envelope and saw a photo of Emily entering the company building, with the same threatening message. But there was something more. A second photo, this one much older, showing a thin girl running from a burning building. It was Emily at 15 on the night of the fire. "They know who you are," Michael said, feeling his blood freeze in his veins. "And they know we're working together," Emily replied. "The question is, how did they find out so quickly?" Michael looked around the office with suspicion. "Do you think we're being bugged?" "It's possible, or someone close to you is reporting our movements." The idea that someone on his team could be working against him made Michael feel sick. He had built his company based on trust, on loyalty. The possibility of betrayal hit him like a punch to the stomach. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, gathering the papers from her desk. "If they know we're investigating, this place is no longer safe." "Where do we go?" "I have a location." a place where we can work without being observed. Michael cancelled all meetings for the day, claiming a family emergency. They left the building separately, Emily first, Michael 20 minutes later. They met at a subway station in the city centre and took 3 different trains before reaching their final destination, an abandoned warehouse in the eastern part of New York City. The place appeared to have been a mechanic's garage in the past. Now it was practically empty, except for some improvised tables and old computers. But what most caught Michael's attention were the walls covered with photos, documents, and lines connecting different pieces of information. It was like an investigation headquarters. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, impressed. 2 years, Emily replied, turning on one of the computers, "since I decided it was time to discover the truth about that night." Michael approached one of the walls and studied the information. There were photos of politicians, businessmen, police, chiefs, names, dates, connections. At the center of it all was a photo of a man he recognized immediately, William Harrison, senator from Oregon for more than 15 years. "William Harrison," Michael read aloud. "He's involved in this." "He's not just involved," Emily said, joining him in front of the wall. "He orchestrated everything." Michael felt the world spin. William Harrison was a respected figure in American politics, known for his campaigns against corruption and for the defense of human rights. The idea that he could be behind a massacre was almost inconceivable. "How did you discover this?" Emily pointed to a series of bank documents stuck to the wall. "Money transfers, small amounts made monthly, from an account in Harrison's name to accounts controlled by Frank Miller. Always on the same day, always the same amount, for 3 years until the month of the fire. That doesn't prove he ordered the massacre." "No," Emily agreed, "but it proves he had business with Miller, and I have more." She led him to another section of the wall, where there were transcripts of telephone conversations. Michael recognized Emily's careful handwriting. "One of the girls who survived the fire told me she overheard a conversation between Miller and someone on the phone the night before. Miller was nervous, saying he didn't want to do it, that it was too risky. The person on the other end said it was too late to back out, that the problem needed to be solved once and for all." "And you think that someone was Harrison?" "I know. It was Harrison, because I got the record of calls from that night. 3 calls from the senator's office to the brothel's phone. The last one was made at 11:15 at night. The fire started at midnight." Michael sat heavily in a chair. The evidence was circumstantial but convincing. And if Emily was right, it meant that a United States senator had ordered the deaths of 17 people to cover up some kind of scandal. "But why?" he asked. "Why would Harrison want to kill me? I barely knew him at the time." "Because you weren't really the target," Emily said softly. "You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The real target was another person who was supposed to be at that meeting, but cancelled at the last minute." "Who?" Emily showed him another document, a federal investigation report that had been archived without explanation. "Congressman Thomas Wilson. He was investigating a corruption scheme that involved energy contracts in the Pacific Northwest. He discovered that someone in Washington was diverting federal funds destined for rural electrification and using the money to finance political campaigns." Michael began to understand, and Harrison was involved in the scheme. Harrison was the leader of the scheme. Wilson had discovered documents that would prove everything. He arranged a meeting in Portland to meet with informants who had more evidence, but someone leaked the information, and Harrison decided to eliminate everyone involved. Exactly. Wilson, the informants, anyone who could testify against him. The fire would be classified as an accident, and all evidence would be destroyed, along with the witnesses. But Wilson wasn't there. No, he cancelled the meeting at the last minute because of a family emergency. You went in his place, representing the company that was supposed to provide equipment for the fraudulent contracts. Michael felt nauseated. All these years he had wondered why he had survived when so many others died. Now he knew it was pure coincidence. He should never have been there. What happened to Wilson? Died in a car accident 3 months later, lost control of the vehicle on a deserted road in rural Oregon. There was never a serious investigation. Michael ran his hands through his hair, trying to process all the information. So Harrison got away with it. He eliminated everyone who could threaten him. "Everyone except us," Emily said, and there was something fierce in her voice. "I saw things that night, I heard conversations, and you're the only living person who can confirm that there was a scheduled meeting, that it wasn't an accidental fire. But it's just our word against his. We don't have enough evidence." Emily smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "Not yet, but we will." She went to one of the computers and began typing rapidly, the screen filled with codes, and numbers that Michael couldn't understand. "What are you doing?" "Getting into Harrison's banking systems. If he's still involved in illegal activities, and I'm sure he is, there will be a financial trail." Michael watched her work, impressed with her technical skill. "Where did you learn to do this?" "On the streets. When you need to survive, you learn things that colleges don't teach." While Emily worked, Michael explored more of the warehouse. At a table in the corner, he found piles of files organized chronologically. They were records of all the girls who had passed through the brothel in the years before the fire. Names, ages, cities of origin. Many were underage. "Emily," he called, his voice husky with emotion. "How many girls passed through there?" "Hundreds," she replied without taking her eyes off the screen. "During the 5 years the place operated, hundreds of girls were trafficked there. Most from rural Oregon, some from Idaho, from Washington. They promised work, education, a better life. And what happened to them? Some managed to escape, others were sold to brothels in other cities. Many simply disappeared." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the magnitude of the crime that had been committed. It wasn't just 17 victims, it was hundreds. "I found something," Emily said suddenly, her voice filled with excitement. Michael approached the screen. Emily had managed to access bank statements from an account in the name of a shell company linked to Harrison. There were regular transfers to several different accounts, always in fractioned amounts to avoid suspicion. "Look at the dates," Emily pointed to the screen. "The transfers continue until today. Harrison is still financing illegal operations." "How do we know they're illegal?" Emily clicked on another window showing company records. "Because these accounts belong to companies that don't exist. False addresses, fictitious owners, it's money laundering." "That still doesn't prove he killed those girls." "No, but it proves he continues to be a criminal. And if we can get more evidence, we can force him to confess about Portland." Michael nodded, beginning to understand Emily's plan. She didn't just want to expose Harrison, she wanted to destroy him completely. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to use your contacts. Harrison is a senator, but you know influential people in Washington. We need someone who can press for an official investigation. And if he discovers what we're doing—" "He already discovered," Emily reminded, showing the threatening photos. "The question is, are we going to stop out of fear, or are we going to move forward?" Michael looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, at the courage that radiated from every fiber of her being. In that moment, he realized he was hopelessly in love, not just with the girl who had saved him, but with the warrior woman she had become. "We're moving forward," he said. Emily smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, full of warmth. "Then we'll need a plan." They spent the rest of the day developing a strategy. Michael would use his contacts to secure a meeting with the Attorney General, claiming to have information about corruption in Congress. Meanwhile, Emily would continue collecting digital evidence, building a solid case against Harrison. It was a dangerous plan. If Harrison discovered what they were planning, he would not hesitate to eliminate them as he had done with the other witnesses. But they both knew there was no turning back. They had crossed a line from which they could not turn. Around 7 in the evening, when hunger finally forced them to take a break, Michael went out to buy food. When he returned with sandwiches and coffee, he found Emily sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, looking at one of the photos of the fire victims. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "Sometimes I wonder if they would forgive me," Emily said softly. "Forgive you for what?" "For having survived. for having taken so long to bring justice. Michael put his arm around her shoulders. You have nothing to apologize for, Emily. You were just a child. I could have talked to the police at the time. I could have told them what I heard. And do you think they would have believed you? A 15-year-old girl with no family, no protection, accusing a senator? Emily leaned against him, and Michael felt the warmth of her body against his. I just wish they were alive. I know. But you can't carry the guilt for their deaths. The only person guilty is Harrison. They remained silent for a few minutes, the weight of responsibility and danger weighing on both of them. Michael could feel Emily's breath against his neck, the subtle perfume of her hair. It was an intimate moment amidst the chaos of their lives. Michael, Emily said softly. Yes? If something happens to me, promise you'll continue. That you won't let Harrison escape again. Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise? Michael held her tighter. I promise, but also promise me something. What? That we'll get through this together, alive. Emily raised her head to look at him. Their faces were close enough for Michael to see small, golden flecks in her dark eyes. I promise, she whispered. The kiss that followed was different from the first. There was no hesitation this time, only need. Emily turned to face him, her hands entwining in his hair. Michael pulled her closer, as if he could protect her from the entire world just by holding her tight enough. When they separated, they were both breathless. This is crazy, Emily murmured, echoing her words from days before. The best kind of crazy in my life, Michael responded, also repeating what he had said before. But this time neither of them stopped. Emily's hands found the buttons of his shirt, while his slid along the curve of her back. It was as if years of tension, of repressed desire, had finally found a release valve. They made love right there on the cold floor of the warehouse, surrounded by evidence of past crimes and the uncertainty of the future. It was desperate and tender at the same time, an affirmation of life amidst so much death. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Emily traced small circles on Michael's chest. I never thought this was possible, she said. What? Feeling safe in someone's arms. Michael kissed the top of her head. You will always be safe with me. Even though I lied to you, even though I infiltrated your company with ulterior motives, especially because of that, you did what you needed to do to survive, to seek justice. I respect that. Emily raised her head to look at him. And if we discover things about you that are difficult to accept, things from your past that you would prefer to forget? Michael hesitated. There were things in his past that he wasn't proud of, decisions he had made out of greed or cowardice. But looking at Emily, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, he knew it didn't matter. Then we'll deal with it together, he said. Whatever it is. Emily nodded and nestled against him again. Michael felt as if he had found something he didn't know he was looking for. For years, he had built walls around himself, protections against intimacy, against vulnerability. Emily had knocked down all those walls without even trying. They were awakened a few hours later by the sound of a car stopping outside the warehouse. Michael quickly got up, hastily putting on his clothes. Emily did the same, already alert. Were you expecting someone? He whispered. No, she replied, taking a gun that Michael hadn't noticed before from a drawer. You have a gun? I have. Several, she said, checking if it was loaded. When you live like I've lived, you learn to protect yourself. The sound of footsteps approaching made them both crouch behind one of the tables. Michael felt his heart beating so hard, he was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The warehouse door opened with a loud creak. 3 men entered, all wearing dark suits and sunglasses, despite it being night. Michael didn't recognize any of them, but from their posture and the way they moved, it was obvious they were professionals. We know you're here, one of them said, his voice echoing in the empty space. We don't want to hurt you. Just talk. Emily gestured for Michael to remain quiet. She was as tense as a spring, ready for action. Senator Harrison would like to speak with you, the man continued. He has a proposal that might interest you. Michael and Emily exchanged glances. Today, a proposal from Harrison could only mean two things, a bribe or a more direct threat. "You have 5 seconds to show yourselves," the man said, and Michael heard the unmistakable sound of guns being cocked. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were making a decision. Then she slowly stood up, the pistol pointed at the intruders. "I'm here," she said, her voice firm. "But he isn't." Michael was going to protest, but Emily silenced him with a fierce look. She was sacrificing herself to protect him. "Miss Wilson," the man said, smiling coldly. "Or should I say Miss Santos? That's your real name, isn't it?" Emily didn't answer, but Michael saw her shoulders contract slightly. They knew her real identity. "The senator is very interested in speaking with you," the man continued, "especially about your amateur investigation." "I have nothing to say to Harrison." "Oh, but you do. You have a lot to say. About fires, about dead girls, about secrets that were buried long ago." The man took a step forward, and Emily adjusted her aim. "You can come with us willingly, or we can make things unpleasant." "I'll go with you," Emily said suddenly. "But leave him alone. He doesn't know anything." "Oh, but we know that's not true," the man replied. "Mr. Reynolds knows much more than he should. But don't worry, he'll also have his chance to talk to the senator later." Michael felt anger explode inside him. He couldn't stay hidden while Emily was being taken by armed men. He stood up abruptly, ignoring her silent protests. "If you want to talk to us, then talk," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "You don't need guns for that." The man smiled, but there was no humor in the smile. "Mr. Reynolds, finally. The senator will be very happy to see you again. After all, you two have history together." "I've never met Harrison personally." "No? What a shame. He remembers the young lady very well. A brave little girl who saved her businessman from a terrible fire. Very touching, really." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. Harrison knew about the rescue. He knew Emily had saved him. That meant he had been watching them since much earlier than they imagined. "Let's go," the man said, gesturing toward the door. "The senator doesn't like to wait." Emily looked at Michael, and he saw fear in her eyes for the first time since he had known her. Not fear for herself, but fear for him. "It'll be all right," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "Yes, it will," the man agreed sarcastically, "if you're cooperative." They were escorted out of the warehouse to a waiting black car with tinted windows. Michael tried to memorize the route as they drove through the deserted streets of New York, but soon realized they were being taken far from the city. Beside him in the back seat, Emily held his hand tightly. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. She was afraid, but she hadn't given up. "Whatever happens," she whispered in his ear, "don't believe anything Harrison says about me." "Why?" "Because he'll try to separate us. He'll try to make you doubt me." Michael squeezed her hand. "That will never happen." "Promise?" "I promise." The car stopped in front of a large, isolated house surrounded by high walls. Michael recognized the location from the news. It was William Harrison's official residence in New York, where he usually received important politicians and businessmen. They were led through a well-maintained garden to the main door. The house was imposing, decorated with expensive furniture and works of art, all very different from the world Emily had come from. William Harrison was waiting for them in the library, seated behind a huge, dark wood desk. He was a man in his 60s, well-groomed grey hair, impeccable suit. He looked exactly like what he was, a powerful and successful politician. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, standing up to greet them, "and the famous Emily Santos, what a pleasure. To finally meet you both in person." His voice was soft, polite, but there was something cold in his eyes that made Michael regret having left the warehouse. "Please sit down," Harrison said, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of the desk. "We have a lot to talk about." William Harrison served coffee in fine porcelain cups as if he were receiving guests for an afternoon tea. His movements were calm, precise, those of a man accustomed to absolute control. Michael observed every gesture, looking for signs of nervousness or weakness, but found none. "Sugar?" Harrison asked politely, extending the sugar bowl to Emily. "No, thank you," she replied, her voice tense but firm. Mr. Reynolds? Michael shook his head, unable to feign cordiality. The man in front of him had ordered the deaths of 17 people. The idea of sharing coffee with him made his stomach turn. "I understand your apprehension," Harrison said, as if he could read his thoughts. "But I assure you they are unnecessary. We are not enemies. In fact, I believe we can be very useful to each other." "I doubt it," Emily said dryly. Harrison smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Santos, may I call you Emily? Or do you prefer your artistic name, Wilson?" "I prefer you get to the point." "Very well, the point is simple. You two have information that interests me, and I have information that interests you. I propose an exchange." Michael leaned forward. "What kind of exchange?" "You stop this amateur investigation and I tell you what really happened that night in Portland, the complete truth, not the fragments you've managed to piece together." "And why would you do that?" Emily asked, suspicious. "Because the truth, my dear, is much more complex than you imagine, and because I believe that when you know it, you'll understand that I'm not the villain in this story." Michael felt anger growing inside him. "You ordered the deaths of 17 people. How can you not be the villain?" "Ah, but I didn't order anything," Harrison said calmly. "That's the beauty of being at the top of the food chain, Mr. Reynolds. I rarely need to give direct orders." The cynicism in his voice made Emily tense in her chair. Michael saw her hands close into fists. "But let's start at the beginning," Harrison continued, leaning back in his chair. "Emily, do you really believe it was a coincidence that you were in that brothel?" The question seemed to hit Emily like a punch. She blinked several times as if trying to process what she had heard. "What do you mean?" "Your mother, Constance Wilson. A beautiful, intelligent woman. Too bad she got involved with the wrong people." Michael saw Emily go pale. "Don't talk about my mother." "But I need to talk about her, my dear, because your mother is the key to understanding everything." Harrison opened a drawer in the desk and took out a folder. "Constance Wilson wasn't an ordinary prostitute. She was my informant." The cold silence that followed was deafening. Emily seemed to have stopped breathing. "Lie," she whispered. "Your mother worked for me for years," Harrison continued impassively. "She collected information about clients, about suspicious movements, about anything that might be useful. In exchange, I guaranteed protection for you both." "That's not true," Emily said, but her voice faltered. Harrison opened the folder and spread several photographs on the desk. Michael leaned in to see and felt his heart tighten. They were photos of Constance Wilson with men in expensive suits, in elegant restaurants, in luxury cars, and in some of them she was handing envelopes to a man Michael recognized as a younger Harrison. "She didn't know she was being photographed," Harrison explained, "but I always like to keep records of my partnerships." Emily picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. It was an image of her mother laughing, looking genuinely happy next to Harrison. She looked like a different woman from the tortured, addicted mother Emily remembered. "Your mother was very good at what she did," Harrison continued. "Intelligent, observant, charismatic. Men trusted her, told her secrets. She helped me uncover several corruption schemes, several crimes. It was thanks to her that I was able to build my political empire." "Then why did she die?" Emily asked, her voice broken. "Because she discovered something she shouldn't have discovered. Something about Congressman Thomas Wilson and his investigation into the energy contracts." Michael felt a twinge of recognition. "Wilson, the man who was supposed to be at the meeting in my place." "Exactly. Constance discovered that Wilson had documents that could incriminate me. More than that, she discovered that I was planning to eliminate him." "And she threatened to turn you in?" Emily asked. "No, she offered me a way out. She said she could steal Wilson's documents, make them disappear. All she wanted in return was a new life for you two. She wanted to get out of that world, take you far away." Harrison paused to take a sip of coffee, letting the words sink in. "What happened?" Michael asked. "Constance tried to steal the documents, but she was discovered. Wilson suspected there was an informant in the brothel and began his own investigation. Constance panicked, started using heavy drugs to deal with the stress, and when she realized she had put you in danger, Emily, she did the only thing a desperate mother could do." "What?" Emily whispered. "She came to me and offered to die in your place." The impact of the words was like an explosion in the silence of the library. Emily stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee cup. "You're lying." "Am I? Then how do you explain the fact that she died exactly 1 week before the fire? A very convenient overdose, don't you think?" Emily was trembling now, tears running down her face. Michael stood up and put his arms around her, but she moved away. "My mother wouldn't be capable of that. She loved me." "Exactly why she was capable," Harrison said softly. "A mother's love is capable of any sacrifice." "But then why was there the fire?" Michael asked. "If Constance was already dead, why kill the other girls?" "Because the plan changed. Wilson discovered about Constance's death and realized she was my informant. He gathered enough evidence not just about the fraudulent contracts, but about the entire network of prostitution and trafficking. The fire was an act of desperation." Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. "You have to understand, Mr. Reynolds, I didn't want those girls to die. But Wilson had scheduled a meeting to hand over all the evidence to the FBI. If that happened, hundreds of people would be arrested, including politicians, judges, businessmen. An entire system would collapse. So you decided to burn everything." "I decided that it was better to sacrifice 17 lives to save a system that benefited thousands of people." The coldness with which he said this made Michael feel sick. "You really believe that?" "I believe that sometimes difficult decisions need to be made by people capable of carrying them. I am one of those people." Emily turned to face him, her face stained with tears. "And me? Why did you let me live? Why didn't you kill me along with the others?" "Because you didn't know anything. You were just a child. And because—" Harrison hesitated for the first time since the conversation began. "Because what?" Emily insisted. "Because I promised your mother you would live. It was the last thing she asked me before she died." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Emily's heavy breathing. Michael could see that she was struggling to process everything she had heard. "I don't believe you," she said finally. "You don't need to believe me, but you need to stop this investigation. You have no idea what you're meddling with. There are people much more powerful than me involved in this." "What people?" Michael asked. "People who don't have my scruples about killing innocents." "Your scruples?" Emily laughed bitterly. "You killed 17 people." "I saved hundreds of others, and now I'm trying to save you too." "We don't want your salvation," Michael said. "No? Then perhaps you want this." Harrison returned to the desk and took out another document from the drawer. It was a birth certificate. Emily Santos, born March 15, 1995, in Portland, Oregon, daughter of Constance Wilson and father unknown. He paused dramatically before continuing. "Except that the father isn't unknown, he's just not officially recognized." Emily took the certificate with trembling hands. "What are you insinuating?" "I'm not insinuating anything, I'm stating. Thomas Wilson was your father, Emily." The world seemed to stop. Michael heard the sound of his own heart beating as he processed the information. Emily was looking at the certificate as if it were a document in a foreign language. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Constance and Wilson had an affair when she was very young, before she entered the world of prostitution. He was married, had a promising political career. He couldn't acknowledge an illegitimate daughter, so he abandoned her. He supported her financially for years. How do you think Constance managed to keep you in school, buy decent clothes, pay for a doctor when necessary? The money came from Wilson." Emily sat heavily in the chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "But when Wilson discovered that Constance was working for me, he was furious. He threatened to expose everything, destroy both her and me. That's why she decided to steal his documents. It wasn't just to protect me. It was to protect the man she loved, even after he had abandoned her." "And you killed my father," Emily said, her voice dead. "Technically, no, the car accident happened 3 months later. But yes, it was by my order." Harrison's brutal honesty seemed to break something inside Emily. She began to cry, not just silent tears, but deep sobs that came from the depths of her soul. Michael moved to console her, but Harrison made a gesture for him to stop. "Let her process," he said. "It's a lot of information for one person." "Why are you telling her this?" Michael asked. "Why cause this pain?" "Because I want her to understand that this isn't a world of good guys and bad guys. It's a world of people making difficult choices in impossible situations. Constance made her choices. Wilson made his. I made mine." "And Emily? What choice does she have?" "The same as all of us, to move forward or be destroyed by the past." Michael looked at Emily, who was still crying silently. He desperately wanted to console her, to protect her from the pain Harrison was causing, but he also knew that she needed to hear everything, needed to know the complete truth, no matter how painful it was. "Is there more?" Emily asked, raising her head. "There is," Harrison admitted, "but I think that's enough for today." "No, I want to know everything. Now." Harrison studied her for a moment, as if assessing whether she was strong enough to hear the rest. "Very well. You want to know why you really survived the fire? Why I let you escape?" "Yes. Because you weren't just Constance's daughter. You were Wilson's daughter, and even dead, he still had followers, people who could cause problems if they discovered. I had killed his daughter. So you used me as life insurance." "Initially, yes, but when you disappeared after the fire, I thought I would never see you again. It was a surprise to discover that you had become a lawyer, that you had built a life." "And an even bigger surprise when she appeared at Mr. Reynolds' company," Michael said. "Ah, but that was no surprise at all," Harrison smiled. "It was all planned." The statement caught them off guard. Emily and Michael exchanged confused looks. "What do you mean by planned?" Emily asked. "Do you really think you got that job on your own merit? That it was a coincidence you were transferred to the legal department and then promoted to Michael's office?" Michael's blood froze. "You orchestrated everything. I facilitated things. When I discovered where Emily was, what she was doing, I saw an opportunity. Two birds with one stone." "What opportunity?" "The chance to finally close the Portland chapter once and for all. You two were the only living people who could connect me to that fire. If I could bring you together, control you, I could ensure that the past remained buried." Emily stood up abruptly. "So everything was a lie. My job, my investigation, even my feelings." "No," Michael said quickly. "Your feelings are real. Mine too." "How can we be sure? If Harrison planned our meeting, how do we know what's real? And what's manipulation?" It was a fair question, and Michael didn't have an easy answer. Harrison had played with their lives as if they were pieces on a chessboard. "Because some feelings can't be fabricated," he said finally. "What I feel for you is real, Emily. More real than anything I've ever experienced." "How touching," Harrison said sarcastically. "But tell me, how do you plan to prove this? How can you be sure you're not just dancing to my tune?" "By stopping the dance," Emily said suddenly, her voice firm again. "How?" "By getting out of your game, by refusing to be manipulated." Harrison laughed. "And how do you plan to do that? You're in my house, surrounded by my men, dependent on my goodwill to leave, here alive." "Maybe," Emily said, "but there's one thing you didn't consider." "What?" "That I learned much more than investigation in the last 2 years." Emily moved faster than Michael thought possible. In a fluid movement, she grabbed a silver letter opener from Harrison's desk and pressed it against his neck before the guards could react. "One thing about growing up on the streets," she said, her voice deadly calm, "is that you learn to defend yourself." Harrison didn't seem frightened, just impressed. "Very good, Emily, but do you really think this will work? My men won't hesitate to shoot you if I give the signal." "Maybe not, but you'll die first. And then you'll die too. And Michael too, does that solve anything?" Emily hesitated, and Michael realized she hadn't thought beyond that moment. It was an act of desperation, not a real plan. "Emily," he said softly, "let him go." "I can't. If I let go, he'll kill us." "No, he won't, because he needs us alive." "Why?" Michael looked at Harrison, who was watching the interaction with clinical interest. Because if anything happens to us, other people will ask questions. I have partners, employees, friends who know we were investigating corruption. If we disappear, they'll want to know why. Very intelligent, Mr. Reynolds, Harrison said, but there's a flaw in your reasoning. What? You can disappear in many ways, car accident, for example, or crime of passion. A rich businessman and his assistant having an affair, things get out of control. The implication was clear and terrifying. Harrison had thought of everything. But I prefer a more elegant solution, he continued, one that benefits all involved. What solution? Emily asked, still keeping the letter opener at his neck. You work for me, officially. Michael, your company receives lucrative government contracts. Emily, you become my personal legal advisor. Both of you become rich, respected, protected. And in exchange? In exchange, you forget Portland. You forget the dead girls. You forget Thomas Wilson. You start a new life, together. It was a tempting offer, Michael had to admit. A comfortable life, without dangers, without persecution. All they would have to do was sell their souls. And if we refuse, he asked, then you're a couple who tragically died in an accident, and the investigation into Portland dies with you. Emily pressed the letter opener a little harder against Harrison's neck, making a small drop of blood appear. There's a third option, she said. What? I kill you now and face the consequences. And condemn Michael to death too? Emily hesitated again, and Michael saw the internal struggle in her eyes. She wanted justice, but she didn't want to sacrifice him for it. Emily, Michael said, let me decide for myself. She looked at him, searching for some sign of what he wanted her to do. If you want to kill him, Michael continued, I support your decision. Even if it means we die here. Michael, note, some things are more important than living, Emily. Justice is one of them. Harrison watched the interaction with fascination. How romantic. Two young idealists choosing heroic death instead of practical life. At least we die with dignity, Emily said. Dignity doesn't warm the bed at night, Harrison replied coldly. It was then that Michael heard something that made his heart race. The distant sound of sirens approaching. Harrison heard it too, and his face hardened. What did you do? Nothing, Michael said, but his mind was racing. The sirens were rapidly approaching. Lie. You called the police. We didn't call anyone, Emily said, but she also seemed confused by the sound of the sirens. The sirens got louder, and then stopped right in front of the house. Michael heard the sound of cars stopping, doors slamming, voices shouting orders. FBI! The house is surrounded. Harrison freed himself from the letter opener, taking advantage of Emily's distraction, and quickly went to the intercom on the wall. Robert, he said into the device, what's happening? Senator, the FBI is here with a search and seizure. So aren't. They know about the documents. Harrison's face paled. What documents? All of them. The contracts, the bank transfers, the records of the girls, everything. Michael and Emily exchanged astonished looks. Someone had delivered all the evidence to the FBI. How is this possible? Harrison murmured, more to himself than to them. Because, said a familiar voice from the library door, some people still believe in justice. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. At the door was a middle-aged woman, elegantly dressed, with grey hair and eyes, that Michael recognized immediately. Mom, he said, incredulous. Catherine Reynolds entered the library, followed by two FBI agents. Hello, dear, she said, kissing Michael's forehead. Sorry for the delay. What are you doing? Here? Saving you, obviously, Catherine replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mrs. Reynolds, Harrison said, trying to regain his composure. What an unexpected pleasure. Senator Harrison, Catherine replied coldly. I can't say the pleasure is mutual. Mom, Michael said, still in shock. How did you know where we were? Because I had you followed, of course. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that my son was getting involved in something dangerous? Catherine turned to Emily. And you must be Emily. Michael talked a lot about you. Mrs. Reynolds, Emily said hesitantly, I don't understand. You will, but first let's get out of here. One of the FBI agents approached Harrison. "Senator William Harrison, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, human trafficking, and multiple homicide." As handcuffs were being placed on Harrison, he looked at Catherine with hatred. "How did you get the evidence?" Catherine smiled, a smile that looked very much like Michael's. "Let's just say I have my own methods of investigation." "This won't end here," Harrison said as he was being led away. "There are other people involved, people who won't allow this to continue." "Then we'll have to deal with them too," Catherine replied calmly. When Harrison was taken away by the agents, Catherine turned to Michael and Emily. "Now," she said, "how about we go home and talk properly? I have a feeling you have many questions." Michael looked at Emily, who still seemed in a state of shock with everything that had happened. "Yes," he said, "many questions." As they left Harrison's house, Emily held Michael's hand tightly. They had survived the first confrontation, but both knew the fight was far from over. Harrison had been arrested, but his final words echoed in Michael's mind. There were other people involved, and Catherine Reynolds, apparently, knew much more about all of this than she had let on. The night was just beginning. The Reynolds mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a completely different world from Emily's simple apartment in Brooklyn. Michael had never realized how privileged his life had been until he saw Emily observing everything with cautious eyes, like a wild animal in unfamiliar territory. Catherine guided them through the entrance hall, decorated with Italian marble, and works of art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Emily walked in silence, still processing everything that had happened at Harrison's house. "Please sit down," Catherine said, indicating a leather armchair in the family's private library. "I'll prepare some tea. Or would you prefer something stronger?" "Tea is fine," Emily replied softly. Michael sat down beside her, noticing how her hands were still trembling slightly. The revelations about her parents had deeply shaken her. "How are you?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "I feel like my entire life has been a lie." "It wasn't a lie. You are real, Emily. What you've built, who you've become, that's real." Catherine returned a few minutes later with a tea tray and cookies, moving with the natural grace of someone born into that world of luxury. But there was something different about her now, a hardness in her eyes that Michael had never noticed before. "Before anything else," Catherine said, serving the tea, "I need to apologize to both of you." "Apologize for what?" Michael asked. "For taking so long to intervene. You were in real danger, and I could have prevented it." "Mom, how did you know about Harrison? How did you get the evidence?" Catherine sighed and sat down across from them. "Because I've been investigating William Harrison for 15 years. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily and Michael exchanged confused looks. "Why?" Emily asked. "Because he killed my husband." Michael felt the world spin. "Dad died in a plane crash. You always said—" "I lied," Catherine said simply, "to protect you. Robert Reynolds was investigating irregularities in government contracts when he died. He had discovered the same corruption network that you found, only 15 years earlier." The words hit Michael like physical punches. His father hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered. "How do you know this?" "Because Robert told me everything before he died. He knew he was in danger, that they had discovered his investigation. In our last conversation, he gave me a list of names, hidden documents, evidence of everything." Catherine stood up and walked to a discreet safe behind a bookshelf. She entered a combination and took out a thick folder. "For 15 years, I continued his investigation. I hired private detectives, hackers, private investigators. I spent a fortune discovering the truth about Harrison and his network." "And why did you never do anything with that information?" Emily asked. "Because I didn't have enough proof. And because I knew that if I tried to expose Harrison alone, he would kill me like he killed Robert." Catherine spread documents on the coffee table. They were photographs, bank statements, audio recordings, detailed reports. It was a more complete and professional investigation than anything Emily had managed to gather. "But when Michael became involved with you, Emily, and I realized you were meddling with the same people who killed my husband, I knew it was time to act." "You knew who I was?" Emily asked. "I knew. From the first day you entered Michael's company, I had you investigated, and when I discovered your true identity, your connection to Portland, I understood it wasn't a coincidence. Michael felt betrayed. You both knew who the other was and no one told me. I didn't know about your mother, Emily said quickly. I only found out today. And I needed to be sure your intentions with Michael were genuine, Catherine added. Many women have approached him for money over the years. And what was your conclusion? Emily asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Catherine smiled for the first time since they arrived. That you love him as much as he loves you, and that you're both too brave for your own good. Michael took Emily's hand. So now we know the truth. Harrison is in jail, it's over. No, Catherine said somberly. Harrison was just a piece of a much larger puzzle. There are other people involved, people more powerful than him. Who? Catherine showed a photograph. 5 men in expensive suits, smiling for the camera at an elegant social event. Michael recognized some faces, important politicians, influential businessmen. This is the real inner circle, Catherine explained. They call themselves the protectors. They believe they are above the law, that they can do anything to maintain power and money. Emily studied the photo carefully. Was Harrison in this group? He was the newest member. The others are much more dangerous because they are much more careful. Harrison was too ambitious, drew too much attention. The others preferred to get rid of him when they realized he was being investigated. Get rid of him how? Michael asked. By facilitating his arrest. Do you think it was a coincidence that the FBI appeared at exactly the right time? They knew Harrison had taken you to his house. They wanted him to be arrested. The implication was terrifying. So they used us as bait. Exactly. And now that Harrison has been eliminated, you've become a problem that needs to be solved. Emily stood up abruptly. So it will never end? There will always be someone trying to kill us. Not necessarily, Catherine said calmly. There is a way to end this once and for all. How? By destroying the entire group, all of them at once. Michael felt a shiver. Is that possible? It is. But it will be dangerous, and you'll have to trust me completely. Emily sat down, again but still looked tense. What's the plan? Catherine smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. In 2 weeks, there's a charity auction at the Fontainebleau in Miami. It's an annual event to raise funds for victims of domestic violence. Very noble, very respectable. And all the group members will be there. It's one of the few occasions when they gather publicly, and it will be our only chance to catch them together. To do what exactly? Expose all of them. Live in front of hundreds of important people, with television cameras recording everything. Michael shook his head. That's insane. They'll never allow that to happen. They won't have a choice, because you two will be there as my guests, and I'm going to give them a proposal they can't refuse. What proposal? Catherine leaned forward, her eyes shining with determination. I'm going to offer to buy your silence, publicly, in front of everyone. Emily frowned. What do you mean? I'll announce that my son and his fiancée, survivors of the terrible Portland fire, have decided to forgive those responsible in exchange for a generous donation to a foundation to help victims of human trafficking. That won't work, Michael said. They'll know it's a trap. They will, but they won't be able to do anything at the time without exposing themselves. And when they think they've managed to buy us off, that's when we'll make our move. What? Move? Catherine opened a laptop and showed a computer program that Michael didn't recognize. During the event, hackers I've hired will hack into the hotel's security system and broadcast evidence against all of them on the TV screens. Documents, recordings, photos, all live for hundreds of people. It was a bold and risky plan. It was also completely insane. And afterward? Emily asked. What happens after they've been exposed? Then you'll finally be free. All of them will be in jail or fleeing the country. There will be no one left to threaten you. Michael looked at Emily, searching for her reaction. She was studying the documents spread across the table, her mind clearly working through the details of the plan. There's a problem, Emily said finally. What? If we're going to pretend we're willing to accept a bribe, they'll want guarantees. They'll want us to prove our loyalty somehow. Catherine nodded. I thought of that too, that's why you'll have to get married. What? Michael and Emily said at the same time. A marriage would make you a family, a unit. It would be harder for one of you to betray the other, and it would also show that you're committed to starting a new life, leaving the past behind. Michael felt his heart race, but not from fear. The idea of marrying Emily, even if it was part of a dangerous plan, made him feel a happiness he hadn't expected. Emily, he said softly, what do you think? Emily looked into his eyes, and Michael saw in them the same mix of fear and hope. That he felt. I think it's crazy, she said, but I also think it might work. So you accept? I accept the plan. As for the marriage, she hesitated. I need to know it's not just strategy. I need to know you really want this. Michael took both her hands in his. Emily, from the first time I saw you in that office, I knew you would change my life. After discovering who you really were, I knew I couldn't live without you. And now, knowing everything we know, knowing all the dangers we face, I'm only sure of one thing. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, no matter how long that might be. Tears began to flow down Emily's face. Even knowing that my family is involved in all of this, even knowing that my mother was an informant and my father was corrupt, your family doesn't define who you are. You define who you are, and you are the bravest, most determined, most incredible woman I've ever met. Emily smiled through her tears. Then yes, I accept marrying you. Catherine applauded softly. Perfect. Now we can begin the preparations. When would the wedding be? Michael asked. Next week. It needs to be before the event in Miami, so we have time to establish the narrative that you're starting a new life. It was very fast, but it also made sense within the context of the plan. Michael looked at Emily, who nodded determinedly. It will be a small wedding, Catherine continued. Just close family and a few friends, but it will be legal official. You will really be married. And if the plan goes wrong? Emily asked. If we can't expose the group? Then at least you'll have each other, Catherine said simply, and sometimes that's enough. Michael squeezed Emily's hand. It will be enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. Catherine took control of all the details, from choosing the church to the guest list. Emily felt as if she were being dragged by a current, but not a current that hurt her. It was more like being carried by a wave that was taking her where she had always wanted to go, only faster than she had expected. The wedding dress was the biggest challenge. Emily had never dreamed of weddings as a child. She had had more urgent concerns, but when Catherine took her to an exclusive atelier in Fifth Avenue, and she saw herself in the mirror wearing white silk and delicate lace, she felt something she had never experienced before, the sensation of being a princess. You look beautiful, Catherine said, adjusting the veil. Robert would be proud to have you as a daughter-in-law. Even knowing where I come from, especially knowing where you come from, he always admired people who could reinvent themselves, who could overcome impossible obstacles. Emily looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman she saw there was different from the frightened girl who had fled Portland 12 years ago, but she was also different from the invisible assistant who had entered Michael's office a few months before. She was someone new, someone who was finally learning to accept happiness. Catherine, she said softly, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Why are you doing this? Not just the plan to catch the group, but all of this. The wedding, accepting me into the family, treating me like a daughter. Catherine stopped adjusting the veil and looked at Emily through the mirror. Because when I lost Robert, I thought I would never be happy again. And when Michael grew up and became a successful but lonely man, I knew he had inherited my sadness. But since you came into his life, I see my son smile genuinely for the first time in years. That's worth any risk. Emily turned to hug Catherine, careful not to wrinkle the dress. Thank you for everything. You don't need to. Thank me. You're part of the family now. The wedding took place in a small, intimate chapel in the Hamptons, away from the curious eyes of the New York media. Michael was nervous, not about getting married, but because he knew that soon after the ceremony they would have to leave for Miami and set the dangerous plan in motion. When Emily appeared at the entrance of the chapel, everything else disappeared. She was radiant, walking toward him with a smile that lit up the entire space. Michael felt tears in his eyes, not of sadness, but of a happiness so intense it almost hurt. The ceremony was simple, but moving. They exchanged vows they had written, personally promises of love, protection, and loyalty that went far beyond traditional words. When the priest declared them husband and wife, and Michael kissed Emily for the first time as his wife, he felt as if he had finally found his place in the world. The reception was small but joyful. Catherine had invited only people she completely trusted, some distant relatives, long-time employees, and 2 federal agents disguised as guests. Everyone knew that this wedding was more than a celebration. It was the beginning of a dangerous operation. Around 10 at night, when the last guests were leaving, Catherine approached the newlyweds. "Tomorrow we fly to Miami," she said quietly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Michael looked at Emily, who held his hand firmly. "We are." "Then may God protect us," Catherine murmured. That night, in their hotel room in the Hamptons, Michael and Emily could finally be truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. The full moon came through the window, illuminating the room with a silver, romantic light. "Do you regret it?" Emily asked, lying in his arms. "Marrying you?" "Never. Getting involved in all of this. If it weren't for me, you would be living your quiet life without risking death." Michael turned her so they were face to face. "Emily, my life before you wasn't living. It was just existing. You gave me a purpose, a reason to be brave. And if something goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. But what if it does?" Michael kissed her forehead. "Then at least we'll have had this night, this moment, and that's already more than I ever thought I would have." Emily nestled against him, and Michael felt as if he could protect her from anything just by holding her tight enough. But he knew that the next day in Miami, they would face the greatest danger of their lives. "Michael," Emily whispered in the darkness. "Yes?" "I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that. I love you too. More than anything in the world." They fell asleep intertwined, husband and wife, partners in love and in danger. Outside, dawn was approaching, bringing with it the day that would define not only their future, but the fate of dozens of innocent people who deserved justice. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. The next morning, they woke up, early and packed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Catherine was waiting for them in the hotel lobby, elegantly dressed as always, but Michael could see tension in her eyes. "The jet is waiting," she said. "Are you ready?" Michael looked at Emily, who nodded determinedly. "We're ready," he said. As the jet took off toward Miami, Michael held Emily's hand and looked out the windows at the mountains below. In a few hours, they would be face to face with the most dangerous men in America, men who had killed hundreds of people and wouldn't hesitate to kill a few more. But they would also be together, and that somehow made it all worthwhile. The plane cut through the clouds toward the final destination, carrying 3 people determined to bring justice, no matter the price. The final battle was about to begin. The Fontainebleau Miami Beach was dazzling on the night of the charity auction. Golden lights bathed the Art Deco facade of the most famous hotel in Miami, while luxury cars unloaded the most influential guests in the country. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities, and socialites walked the red carpet, all dressed in their best clothes, smiling for the cameras as if they didn't have dark secrets hidden away. Emily adjusted the pearl necklace Catherine had lent her, trying to control her nerves. The navy blue silk dress she wore was elegant and discreet, perfect for the wife of a successful businessman, but beneath the silk, pressed against her thigh, was a small digital recorder, and in her clutch, disguised as lipstick, was a transmitter that maintained constant contact with Catherine's team of hackers. "You look beautiful," Michael whispered in her ear as they got out of the car. He was impeccable in his tuxedo, but Emily could feel the tension in his muscles when he offered his arm to her. "And you're nervous," she replied softly, accepting his arm. "Terrified would be more accurate." Catherine was waiting for them at the entrance to the main hall, radiant in a silver gown. To any casual observer, she looked like a rich widow enjoying an elegant evening. No one would suspect that she had spent the last 3 days coordinating an operation that could dismantle the most powerful corruption network in America. "Are you ready?" she asked when they approached. "As ready as possible for something completely insane," Michael replied. "Remember," Catherine said quietly, "they can't do anything against you. Publicly. There are too many important people here, too many cameras. But after the event, when you leave the hotel, we'll be dead before we reach the airport," Emily completed. "We understand the risks." "Then, let's begin." The main hall of the Fontainebleau was magnificently decorated with white and gold flowers. Round tables accommodated the guests, each costing more than $50,000. On the stage, an auction had begun, with works of art and luxury experiences being sold for astronomical values, supposedly to help victims of domestic violence. Emily observed the crowd, looking for the faces she had memorized from Catherine's photos. There was Secretary Carl Henderson smiling as he offered $200,000 for a weekend in Paris. At the next table, businessman Richard Vincent laughed at a joke while his wife adjusted her diamonds. And near the stage, Federal Judge Marcus Sullivan politely applauded each winning bid. They all looked like normal, respectable people. It was hard to believe they had ordered the deaths of hundreds of innocent people. "There," Catherine whispered, discreetly indicating a table near the window. Edward Montgomery, the leader of the group. Emily felt her heart race when she saw the man. Edward Montgomery was an energy sector businessman, owner of one of the largest fortunes in the country. He was also, according to Catherine's evidence, the real architect behind the entire corruption and human trafficking scheme. Harrison had been merely his soldier. Montgomery was a man in his 70s, impeccably combed white hair, eyes blue and cold as ice. When his gaze met theirs across the hall, Emily felt as if she were being analyzed by a predator evaluating its next prey. "He knows we're here," she murmured to Michael. "Of course he knows. He probably planned our deaths before we even arrived at the hotel." What a comforting thought. The auction continued for another hour, with increasingly extravagant items being sold. Emily tried to focus on the plan, but couldn't take her eyes off Montgomery. He seemed completely relaxed, animatedly conversing with other guests, drinking champagne, behaving like any other rich philanthropist. It was then that she noticed something that made her choke on her own champagne. "Michael," she whispered urgently. "What?" "Look at Montgomery's table, the blonde woman next to him." Michael followed her gaze and frowned. "What about her?" "I know her. She was at the brothel in Portland." Michael's blood froze. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. She was one of the older women, one who took care of the younger girls. They called her Goldie. What is she doing here?" "I don't know, but it can't be good." Before they could discuss further, the master of ceremonies took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we have a special surprise for you tonight. Mrs. Catherine Reynolds would like to make an important announcement." Catherine gracefully stood up and walked to the stage. Emily felt her heart race. It was time. "Good evening," Catherine said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you for being here tonight, contributing to such a noble cause." Polite applause echoed through the hall. "As many of you know," Catherine continued, "my son Michael and his wife Emily are survivors of a terrible tragedy that happened 12 years ago in Portland. A fire that killed 17 innocent young women." The hall fell silent. Emily could feel the gazes of everyone present on her and Michael. For years, they have carried the weight of this tragedy, questioning what they could have done differently, how they could honor the memory of those girls. Emily saw Montgomery lean forward, interested. "But today," Catherine said, her voice gaining strength, "they have decided to transform their pain into hope. They have decided to forgive." A murmur ran through the hall. Montgomery smiled slightly. Therefore, tonight I am proud to announce the creation of the Aurora Foundation, dedicated to combating human trafficking and helping victims of sexual exploitation. And to launch this foundation, my family is making an initial donation of $50 million. Enthusiastic applause erupted throughout the hall. Emily forced a smile as the television cameras focused on her and Michael. Catherine continued speaking about the foundation, about forgiveness, about moving forward. It was a perfect performance, exactly what the plan required. But Emily could see in Montgomery's eyes that he wasn't completely convinced. When Catherine finished her speech and returned to the table, Montgomery stood up. To Emily's surprise, he walked directly to them. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, kissing Catherine's hand, "what an inspiring speech." "Mr. Montgomery," Catherine replied calmly. "Thank you." "And you must be the famous survivors," he said, turning to Emily and Michael. "What a fascinating story." There was something in the way he said fascinating that made Emily shiver. "May I invite you to join my table?" Montgomery continued. "I would very much like to hear more about this spiritual transformation." It was impossible to refuse without appearing rude. Catherine nodded graciously, and they headed to Montgomery's table. The blonde woman, Goldie, looked directly at Emily when she approached. For a moment, Emily saw recognition in her eyes, followed by something that looked very much like panic. "Emily," Montgomery said when they sat down, "may I call you Emily? You must have very vivid memories of that terrible night." "Some," Emily replied carefully. "And now you've simply decided to forgive? That's admirable, but also a little surprising." Michael leaned forward. "What do you mean by surprising?" "Well," Montgomery smiled coldly, "people who have been through traumatic experiences generally need justice, answers. It's natural to want to know who was responsible, who should pay for what happened. Sometimes the price of justice is too high," Catherine said softly. But there's always a price to be paid for something, isn't there? The question is, who pays?" The conversation was interrupted by a waiter offering champagne. Emily took a glass, but didn't drink. Something about the situation was making all her survival instincts flare up. It was then that she noticed the blonde woman was making discreet signals to someone across the hall. "Excuse me," Emily said, standing up. "I need to go to the bathroom." "Of course," Montgomery said. "Goldie, why don't you accompany Mrs. Reynolds? You might have a lot in common." Emily felt her blood freeze, but she couldn't refuse without creating suspicion. She followed the blonde woman out of the main hall. The ladies' room was empty, elegantly decorated with marble and gold mirrors. As soon as the door closed behind them, Goldie turned to Emily. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice tense. "Why not?" "Because they know who you are. They know you're not here to forgive anyone." Emily studied the woman's face. She seemed genuinely concerned. "How do you know?" "Because I've known them for 20 years, and because I helped raise you." The revelation hit Emily like a punch. "What?" "Your mother was my best friend. When she died, I promised I would take care of you. That's why I helped you escape that night." You helped me? Who do you think unlocked the back doors? Who turned off the lights so you and the young man could get out unseen?" Emily leaned on the marble counter, trying to process the information. I've been working for them for 20 years. Yes, but I never liked it. I never wanted to be part of that. I just didn't have a choice. And now? Now they want me to confirm your identity. They want to be sure you're really who they say you are before—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Before they kill me. You need to get out of here. Now. There are armed men in the hotel pretending to be waiters, security. If you don't leave in the next 10 minutes, you won't leave alive." Emily felt panic begin to grow, but forced herself to stay calm. "And my husband and Catherine. They're marked too. Montgomery decided that you three know too much. Then let's leave together. Come with us." Goldie sadly shook her head. "I can't. They'll kill my daughter if I run." "Your daughter?" "She's 15. She's at a boarding school in Switzerland. At least that's what they tell me. In reality, I don't know where she is. It's been 3 years since I've seen her. Emily felt anger explode inside her. Another family destroyed by those monsters. Then let's end this once and for all, she said, touching the transmitter in her clutch. Today. Now. What are you going to do? Something I should have done 12 years ago. Emily left the bathroom with determination. In the main hall, Michael and Catherine were still talking with Montgomery, but she could see tension in both their postures. She walked directly to their table, completely ignoring Montgomery, and whispered in Michael's ear, "We have 10 minutes. Before they kill us, the plan needs to happen now." Michael nodded almost imperceptibly. Catherine, who had overheard, discreetly touched the device hidden in her bracelet. Somewhere in the hotel, hackers began to work. "Mr. Montgomery," Emily said loudly, "there's something I'd like to tell." "Sayasa?" "Of course, my dear. 12 years ago, you ordered the deaths of 17 innocent girls to cover up your crimes." The smile disappeared from Montgomery's face. Conversations around them abruptly stopped. "You killed my mother, my father, and hundreds of other people to protect your dirty fortune," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "And now you plan to kill us too." "Miss," Montgomery said, trying to maintain his composure, "I think you're confusing me with someone—" "I'm not confusing anything," Emily interrupted. She took the digital recorder from her clutch and placed it on the table. "I have recordings here of all your conversations from the last 2 years, murder orders, discussions about human trafficking, planning illegal operations." The hall was completely silent now. All television cameras were focused on their table. "And it's not just you," Emily continued, looking around the hall. "Secretary Henderson, Mr. Vincent, Judge Sullivan, you're all involved." The men mentioned stood up abruptly, their faces pale. It was then that the television screens in the hall began to show documents, bank statements, photos, audio recordings, detailed evidence of each crime committed by each member of the group. Panic took over the hall. Guests began to scream. Some tried to run out. Cameras recorded everything. Montgomery rose slowly, his eyes fixed on Emily. "You have no idea what you just did." "I know exactly what I did. I brought justice." "You 3 won't leave this hotel alive," he said coldly. "Maybe not," Michael said, also standing. "But we won't die in silence either." It was then that Emily saw the armed men moving through the hall. Pretending to be security, they were positioning themselves to block all exits. "Catherine," she whispered, "we need to leave. Now." But Catherine smiled calmly. "We don't need to." "What?" "Look outside." Emily looked through the large windows of the hall and saw blue and red lights flashing. Dozens of them. The FBI had completely surrounded the hotel. "How?" Montgomery was incredulous. "You really think I would plan all this without having—" "An escape plan," Catherine said. "The FBI received all the evidence an hour ago. They were just waiting for my signal." Complete chaos took over the hall. Federal agents burst through the main doors, arresting people, shouting orders. Montgomery's armed men tried to resist but were quickly overwhelmed. Emily saw Montgomery trying to escape through the kitchen, but Michael intercepted him. For a moment, the 2 men fought, but Michael was younger and stronger. He knocked Montgomery to the ground and kept him there until the agents arrived. "Edward Montgomery," a federal agent said, putting handcuffs on him, "you are under arrest for racketeering, multiple homicide, human trafficking, and a list of other crimes that will take all day to read." As Montgomery was being led away, he looked at Emily one last time. "This doesn't end here," he said. "There are others. There are always others." "Then we'll catch them too," Emily replied. An hour later, when the chaos had finally calmed down and the last members of the group had been arrested, Emily, Michael and Catherine found themselves alone in the empty hall of the Fontainebleau. Overturned chairs, broken glasses and trampled flowers were all that remained of the elegant charity event. "Is it over?" Emily asked, hardly believing it. "It's over," Catherine confirmed, "at least this part." "And Goldie? The woman from the bathroom?" "She's under police protection. She'll testify against them in exchange for immunity, and we'll help her find her daughter." Michael pulled Emily into his arms. We did it. Did we really? 17 girls finally have justice. Hundreds of families finally have answers. Yes, we did it. Emily allowed herself to cry for the first time since everything had begun. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of exhaustion, of a kind of peace she had never experienced before. "And now?" she asked when she finally stopped crying. "Now," Michael said, "we live our life, for real this time." 6 months later, Emily was standing on the veranda of a beach house in the Hamptons, looking out at the ocean. The sea breeze played with her loose hair, and for the first time in her adult life she felt truly at peace. The Aurora Foundation had become a reality, helping hundreds of victims of human trafficking rebuild their lives. The trial of Montgomery and his accomplices had been a media spectacle, but it had also brought real changes: stricter laws, deeper investigations, better protection for witnesses. Michael appeared on the veranda, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, offering a cup to her. "About how we got here." "With a lot of luck and even more stubbornness," Emily laughed. "And with a mother-in-law who's more dangerous than we imagined." "She's enjoying being a consultant for the FBI. I think she's finally found her true calling." They remained in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the peaceful morning. "Emily," Michael eventually said. "Yes?" "There's something I want to give you." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Emily felt her heart race. "Michael, we're already married." "I know, but you deserve a real proposal, one that isn't part of a dangerous plan to bring down criminals." He knelt on the veranda, opening the box to reveal a stunning engagement ring. "Emily Wilson Reynolds," he said, smiling. "Will you marry me? Again? This time just for love?" Emily began to laugh through her tears. "Yes, you idiot. Of course I will." When he placed the ring on her finger, Emily felt as if she were finally coming home. Not the physical home where she had grown up, or even the luxurious home where she lived now, but the kind of home you carry in your heart. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, forever." As they kissed on the veranda, with the sun rising over the ocean, Emily thought of the 17 girls who had died in Portland. Their deaths had not been in vain. Their pain had transformed into purpose, their tragedy into triumph. She had found justice for them. And in the process, she had found love for herself. It was more than enough. It was everything. 2 years later, Emily held a newborn baby in her arms while Michael read aloud the names engraved on a memorial plaque in the garden of the Aurora Foundation headquarters in New York City. Maya Santos, 13 years old. Rebecca Silva, 16 years old. Carmen Oliveira, 15 years old. He continued reading all 17 names, as they did every year on the anniversary of the fire. It was important to remember, important to honor their memories. The baby, a girl they had named Hope, slept peacefully in Emily's arms. Around them, other families who had been helped by the foundation were gathered for the annual memorial ceremony. "They would have been proud of you," Michael said softly, kissing Emily's forehead. "I hope so." Catherine approached, radiant as always at the sight of her granddaughter. "How did she sleep?" she asked, extending her arms to take Hope. "Like an angel," Emily replied, handing the baby to her grandmother. "I think she knows she's safe." "She is," Catherine confirmed. "You two made sure of that." As they walked back home through the streets of New York, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a frightened girl in a burning brothel to a strong woman, wife, mother, and advocate for other victims. It hadn't been easy. There were still occasional nightmares, moments of sadness thinking about what could have been different, but there was also love, purpose, family. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best," she replied. "Are you referring to me?" he joked. "I'm referring to everything. The fire that brought us together, the danger that strengthened us, the pain that taught us to value happiness." Michael stopped walking and pulled her closer. "Emily Reynolds," he said, using her full name. "You are the wisest woman I know. And you are the most stubborn man. Lucky for us that stubbornness and wisdom make a good combination." They laughed together, and Emily felt that familiar sensation of completeness. Not because her life was perfect. There were still challenges. There was still work to be done at the foundation. There were still victims to help. But because she had finally found her place in the world, by Michael's side, raising hope, honoring the memories of those who couldn't be saved, and saving those who still could be, it was more than dreams. It was purpose. It was love. It was life. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. When they arrived home, Emily put Hope in her crib and watched her daughter sleep for a few minutes. The girl had Emily's dark eyes and Michael's smile. She would be raised with love, security, opportunities. She would never know what it was like to be hungry, afraid, desperate. She would never have to hide, run away, survive. She would be free to be anything she wanted to be. "Thank you," Emily whispered to the 17 girls she knew were listening somewhere, "for giving me strength to fight, for teaching me that some things are worth any sacrifice." A gentle breeze came through the bedroom window, lightly moving the curtains. Emily chose to believe it was them, whispering back, "You're welcome." In the living room, Michael was organizing foundation documents for the next day. More cases, more victims to help, more families to reunite. The work never ended, but neither did the love, the hope, the possibility of making a difference. Emily joined him on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder. "Ready for another day of saving the world?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Ready for another day by your side," she replied. "It's the same thing." "Is it?" "For me, yes. You are my world, Emily. You always have been." Outside, New York continued its frantic nightlife. Millions of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, facing their own challenges. Some would need help. Some would find love. Some would discover purpose. And Emily and Michael would be there together, doing their part to make the world a little better, one life saved at a time. That was how the best stories ended, not with an ending, but with a new beginning, with hope, with love, with the promise that, no matter how dark the night might get, there would always be someone willing to light a candle. There would always be someone willing to save. There would always be someone willing to love. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, that person would find someone willing to be saved, willing to love back, willing to build something beautiful amid the ashes of what was destroyed. Emily and Michael had found that, and now, together, they would help others find it too. It was enough. It was everything. It was forever.